Welcome to this channel dedicated to information technology and cybersecurity. Today we will see how to install Freeradius 3 and Daloradius on a Linux server, which is Ubuntu 20.4. Radius stands for Remote Authentication Dial-In User Service and provides AAA features: authentication, authorization, and accounting. This protocol can be used, for instance, to control access to some devices by a subset of administrators. The three Radius components are the user or device, who requests access to the network. Then you have the network access service, which provides access to the network to the user or device based on the Radius server decision. After that, you have the Radius server, which process the authentication, authorization request, and also perform accounting. It can also send to the NAS some configuration parameters like VLAN ID, IP configuration, etc. Finally, you have the database, which is optional. So the purpose of the database is to store identities. So for instance, you can have MySQL or LDAP, which can be used. And I say that it is optional because sometimes you can have the Radius server which stores this identity. Basically this is how Radius is working with this main component. Alright, let's start. So the only prerequisite here is to have a running Linux machine, physical or virtual. In this case, we will use a virtual machine. So the first step will be for us to check the system updates. So to do that, you have to run this command. Once the system updates are installed, you need to install the Freeradius 3 version. After the installation, please check the version install with the command Freeradius -v to be sure that you have installed the version 3. Freeradius files are in this folder. To have more information on each folder, please check the first video I did on Freeradius installation. I will put the link in the description. Now we need to define the Radius network access server. The configuration is done in the clients.conf file. So for instance, here you can see that we have the localhost configuration, which is used also as a network access server just for testing purpose. So you have the local IP address of the server. Then you also have the secret, which is shared between the server and the network access server. After that, you can have other custom parameters based on what you are trying to configure. But here, in our case, we will use, in this first step, the localhost as a NAS. And then after that, we are sure that everything is working fine, we will use an external network access server. As you may have noticed, the share secret is in clear text. We will cover in another video how to not use clear password in the configuration files. Now let's restart the Freeradius service. The next step is to configure the Freeradius users file. So this is where you will define the user or the device which can authenticate through Radius. So here it is a local database, and it is not very secure because, as you will see, we will use clear text password. So it is not recommended to do it, but the first step is to configure it like this to test. And when you are sure that it is working locally, you can remove this configuration and use like an external database to store securely your identities. Okay, so we have finished the local configuration, so we can test it. To do so, we will use the debug mode to check that everything is working as expected. So first you need to stop the Freeradius which is running in background by running this command. Then you will need to open two terminal windows. So in the first terminal we will launch the rat test command, which is used to test locally the configuration. And then in the second terminal you will launch Freeradius in debug mode by using the Freeradius -x. When you run the command, this is what you should have when it is working. So the most important information is the access accept, which is the attribute sent back by the server to the client. And then in the logs, in the debug mode, you can have other information just for debug in case it's not working. Here you can see that you have everything green, the authentication is successful, everything is okay. So basically the local configuration is working. Once you are sure that everything is working, you need to go back to the configuration we did earlier and remove the local user we have added because it is not needed anymore. Okay, this is what we have done so far. We have seen the Radius summary, then we have installed the system updates. After that, we have installed the Freeradius version 3, and then we have tested locally that everything is working as expected. So locally, the Radius authentication is working. Now the next step will be to install MySQL to store the identities. And then we will also see how to install Daloradius, so the web user interface, in the next steps. Now let's install the Freeradius MySQL module, which is basically like a module used by Freeradius to communicate with MySQL. And we will also need to install the MySQL server by running the following command. After the MySQL installation, you need to set the root password. In my case, I've used this method, but do notice that you can use the following command. Okay, we have set the root password. Now we can stop the background process and start MySQL normally. Let's log in to the MySQL database and create the Radius database, which will be used to store identities and other information. Now we need to create a bind account that will be used by Freeradius to store information. The bind account here is called Radius. This account will have all the rights on the Radius database that we have created. And another information is that the hashtag in this file means that the line is disabled. We also need the Freeradius schema, which specify the MySQL tables needed by Freeradius. Now let's see how to configure Freeradius to use MySQL. To do this, the first step is to open this file. Then we have to update some lines. The first one will be to configure the SQL dialect by changing this line. Then we have to uncomment the SQL driver to use the dialect we have just configured previously. After that, we also need to disable the TLS configuration in this example. In a production environment, I highly recommend to enable the TLS part. If you want to see how to do the TLS configuration, please check the video link in the description. The next part will be to configure the database settings. In order to do so, you need to set the server name, the port used, the login and the password of the MySQL server. In this case, everything is done on the same server, and for this example, we are using the default credentials. In production environment, please change this value to something else, and we will cover in another video on how to not store the admin credentials in files in clear. Add the database name, which is here called Radius values. You also need to uncomment the line read client yes to read Radius client from the database. So we will use the table NAS, which is stored in MySQL. You also need to verify that the line client table is uncommented. Now we need to configure the default virtual server to enable SQL. In order to do that, we have to update this file. Okay, let's configure the inner tunnel virtual server which handles authentication methods through TLS tunnel. Okay, this is what we have done so far. We have seen how to install and configure Freeradius MySQL module. We also saw how to configure and install MySQL server. And finally, we did a link between MySQL and Freeradius. Now we will see how to install the Apache web server, PHP, and Daloradius, the Freeradius web interface. Run this command to install Apache web server. The next step is to install PHP. To test that PHP is indeed installed, we will create a file containing this information. If the installation went well, you should see this web page. After the verification, do not forget to delete this file. The next step is to install Daloradius, which is a Freeradius web interface. We then need now to update the Radius database created earlier with the Daloradius schema. Okay, now let's move the Daloradius files into the web server folder. The most important part is to update the Daloradius configuration file so that it can communicate with the MySQL server. So here we will set the database username, the bind account, the password of this bind account. You should also put the database name, and we have also updated the Freeradius version. As a reminder, we will do another video on how to not use clear text password in files, because this is not secure. Okay, another sum up of what we have done so far. The first thing is that we have installed Apache, then we have installed PHP. After that, we have installed Daloradius, which is a Freeradius web interface. And then we have linked Daloradius to Freeradius and MySQL. The next step now is to test all this configuration and to be sure that we are able to connect to Daloradius and perform modifications through Freeradius and through the MySQL. First thing first, let's test the access to Daloradius web interface. The first step is to update the default credentials. So to do that, you need to go to this path. Now we need to add a network access server and then an end user. So these two components were defined at the beginning of this video. So here we will add them through Daloradius. This is the final part. To test that everything is working as expected, we will use the tool called ntratping. I will put the link in the description on how to get this software. It's totally free. So we fill in all the fields with the required information, the test account, the Radius server IP address, and then the share secret. Once you are ready, you can click on send. If everything is well configured, the response should be access accept. Thanks for watching this tutorial on how to install Freeradius and Daloradius. I hope you enjoy it. Please subscribe to this channel.